This here. All right, and free to land, everyone. This is Jomo with BAM News, and we are joined today by Professor Akinyele Umoja, a scholar, activist, and professor of African American Studies at Georgia State, author of the award-winning book "We Will Shoot Back: Armed Resistance in the Mississippi Freedom Movement." He is also a co-editor of another prize-winning publication, one of my secret favorites, the Black Power Encyclopedia. His scholarship has been featured in several journals, periodicals, and anthologies. Affectionately known as the People's Professor by some of the comrades, he is also the co-founder of the New African People's Organization in the Malcolm X grassroots movement. And he joins us today on the BAM News Service to discuss his newest project, the Memoirs of Robert and Mabel Williams, African American Freedom, Armed Resistance, International Solidarity, to be released later this June. Free to land, Baba. How are you?
Free to land, brother Jomo. Good to see you today. I,
Good to
I want to just add that memoirs of Robert and Mabel Williams co-edited with uh, Dr. Gloria Aneb House and brother John Henry Bracey. John Bracey is now ancestor.
Okay, okay. All right,
Mhm.
good, good. Yeah, that's the first question. We're gonna get into that. So for myself and maybe others, we know of Robert and Mabel, uh, best known through the book Negroes with Guns. The memoirs kind of contains, up until this point, previously unreleased manuscripts that they both wrote towards the end of their lives. Um, and kind of from what I understand from reading, picks up the story of where Negroes with Guns leaves off. As we talk about, so the internet, we would love for you to talk about how the book came about and how you got involved in helping to bring this book to the public.
While the book came about, first it started with Robert and Mabel after they returned back to the United States and lived in Michigan area. He had started on his memoir actually then, and so that was in 1970.
Hmm.
And he died in 96. I think he worked on it in parts until 95. He does even go with his early memories with his family, his birth family. The original title for his manuscript was "While God Lay Sleeping," and that's based on a story, a conflict actually between his mother, who was deeply religious, and his uncle, who was kind of an atheist. And his uncle was saying that, you know, God was asleep while all this stuff was happening to us. That why hasn't God intervened and worked on our side? And so that's where the title comes from. So he tells some of the early memories of his life. He definitely touches on some of the same things that are in Negroes with Guns, and also in other interviews and books that he contributed to. But then he does go into not only his experience in Cuba, but he talks about how he escaped. Actually, so that's discussed.
Mm.
Um, how he escapes because he leaves, goes to New York, then to Canada, and then while he's in Canada, the story he used to always tell was, when I was growing up, they would always say that no man has ever escaped the Canadian Royal Mounties. And he heard the Canadian Royal Mounties were looking for him. So he said, wow, wouldn't it be great if a black man was the first one to escape the Canadian Royal Mounties? And then wouldn't it be even better if that black man was me? But he was assisted, wasn't just like him sneaking and getting there, because he says that Fidel Castro put it out once he heard Robert Williams was on the run, that if he showed up in any Cuban embassy, that they should assist him, because Robert Williams had been involved in solidarity with Cuba from the inception of the Cuban Revolution. But it's not only that, but there were members of, it was clear that um, there was support of the Cuban government, the Cuban Revolution, for his escape. which to just to give it away a little bit, the comrade, the spouse, the partner of Juan Almeida, the black Cuban comrade who was with the leadership of the Cuban Revolution when Fidel and them took power in 1959. His wife actually participated in helping Robert to get on a plane from Cuba from I think it was from Montreal to get to Cuba. So he tells that story. He goes into experience in Cuba, doing Radio Free Dixie from Cuba, producing a newsletter, The Crusader, that they had begun in Monroe, North Carolina, with their neighbor Ethel Azalea Johnson. And I said they are Robert and Mabel. They both tell that story, and then talks about why they leave Cuba, why they go to China, their experiences in Vietnam, experiences in Africa, and then a little bit about his return to the U.S., working with, to some degree, with the support of Milton Henry, Gaidi Obadele in the Republic of New Africa, and then, some of his other activism. Mabel's book actually started, I think she started doing it, she visited China after Robert's death with her son and her daughter-in-law. She started putting it together. Um, and she got sick, so she didn't finish it. And so what we were able to do was to get interviews that she did to kind of flesh out her story. Why do we feel it was important to put it in there? Tell you the truth, be completely candid. Initially, I was working on it with John Bracey, and I took the lead, and so I had finished Roberts a while ago, and then John Bracey, who knew Robert and Mabel better than me, he said this needs Mabel's voice in it, and I was like, I'm finished. I'm ready to get this thing off my desk, and he really insisted, and him being my elder, I went with it. And that's when Aneb Gloria House, and later I like to say about both of them who they are, in case your audience doesn't know. How we got involved was, um, let me see, Mabel died, Robert died in 96, as I mentioned. Mabel died in 2014. I had some contact with Mabel prior to that, but I hadn't finished We Will Shoot Back. And she wanted to know if I could edit it then. And I said, I needed to finish the We Will Shoot Back first, get that out the way. And then when I got back with her, she said that she and her son, John, who was their youngest son, they had two sons together, Robert Jr. and John. And Robert Jr. had passed already. And she said they were going to handle it. And then, I didn't hear anything for a while. And then I was informed that she was ill. So I decided I would leave them alone. I wasn't going to press with them while she was, battling cancer. And then I received a contact from John after she passed, a couple of years after she passed. And he asked me to come to Detroit, and he asked John Bracey to come to Detroit. He also had Muhammad Ahmed, Max Stanford, who had been a part of the Revolutionary Action Movement. He and John Bracey were both part of the Revolutionary Action Movement, which was a organization inspired by Robert and Mabel. And actually, when they became a national organization, there were young, black revolutionaries who traveled to Cuba from Detroit, from California, from New York and Philadelphia, and they formed this they called the Black Liberation Front, um, Revolutionary Action Movement. And so Robert Williams, excuse me, John Bracey and Muhammad Ahmed were both part of that process. Also, Clyde Marks from Freedom Archives was there because he had done a lot of work with Williams as well. But at that point, John, who really only lived maybe like 4 to 6 months, I can't remember the actual date in my mind. Um, After that meeting, he'd asked Bracey and I to take hold to it. And then, with him passing, um, I waited a while. I contacted his widow, and she was there at the meeting, as well as he had another brother Frank, we call him, who was at the meeting too. He has a different mother than Mabel, and so they basically been my contacts and gave John and I the authority to move on it. And it was actually his daughter-in-law, their daughter-in-law Lisa, who suggested Aneb House. Now I've said a little bit about John Bracey, just a little bit more. John Bracey um, was a child of an educator. His mother taught at Howard, and then he moved to the Chicago area, was a young student activist there, became involved in RAM actually in '63, and he's one of the pioneers in Africana studies. He taught at University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He gave a lot of support silently and quietly to revolutionaries like when Muhammad Ahmed, I guess I could say now was underground. It was John Bracey was one of the people who provided him with support, and so and I should also say he was somebody that I had seen speak when I was like 19, and I always looked up to him as a historian. I read his stuff, things of that nature. Gloria Nebb House, very interesting history. She is a scholar activist, a poet. She was involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She worked with Kwame Ture, or at that time Stokely Carmichael in Lowndes County. Then later, after leaving SNCC, she would become a member of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, and both of them actually had a close relationship with the Williams, so that their insights were very helpful in trying to do the book. I had met Mabel, and I met Robert, but it was only one time. When I think it was like 1977, maybe. I was living in LA during that time. I visited Atlanta. I was a part of the African People's Party at that time. And we came down here to visit Muhammad Ahmed. And he told me that Robert Williams was speaking at U.S. China Friendship Association. And so speaking in Atlanta. So I went to the gathering to hear Robert Williams speak. And I mean, it really kind of tripped me out because he was speaking to an audience of mostly white folks, but he was saying, I'm a black separatist. That's it. Which kind of some people, commentators on Robert Williams, has said that he wasn't really a black nationalist. He was just doing that because he was out the country and trying to connect with forces like RAM and RNA. But I said, you don't really get no points with a group of white people by telling them
Mhm.
you're a black separatist. You only say that if you believe it. And so, but he said that, and talked to him. He shook my hand afterwards. That's my extent of my meeting him. I also met Harry Haywood that day and his wife at that time, Gwendolyn Hall. And it's funny, I developed more of a relationship with Gwendolyn Hall and Mabel Williams after that point. Mabel wasn't there to my memory, but I met Mabel in '97. Gwendolyn Hall, um, who's a scholar in her own right, activist in her own right, she invited me after I finished my dissertation to speak at a lecture at the University of New Orleans in '97, and this was right after Robert passed, and the lecture series was dedicated to Robert Williams. And so Tim Tyson, who wrote the book Radio Free Dixie, he had just finished his dissertation. So both of us were the first two plenary speakers. Then Mabel spoke the next day, and or maybe that afternoon. I think Tim and I spoke in the morning, and then Mabel spoke, and John was there with her. And then we invited her to Georgia State, and I spent some time with her, and stayed, over the years, stayed in touch with her. And just loved her insights. Whenever she would come to Atlanta, she would give me a call, let me know she was here. So that's how I got involved with the book. Um, I, I feel like through this process, I developed a relationship with the family, and I'm honored that the family would even ask me to do this. to be responsible for telling the story. I should say a little bit more about when we met John. It wasn't just that he wanted his parents' books to come out.
Mhm.
His perspective was, and I think we're talking about 2016, 17. I need to look and check the date. But it was right after it was pre-George Floyd murder and before Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, before that 2020 season. So I think it might have been after Mike Brown
Mhm.
that and he said he thought it was important that his parents' legacy and the lessons from the struggle in Monroe, um, lesson not only in terms of armed resistance, and that was primary on his mind, but not only in terms of armed resistance, but then also relating to the international community. The third thing, and another part of the Williams legacy is um, revolutionary and grassroots journalism,
Mhm.
right? Because they used journalism through the Crusader, through Radio Free Dixie, through and Robert Williams, even prior to Monroe, was a writer. That was one of the things that motivated him in life. Was in fact, I wonder if they had allowed him to pursue his path, his career path, his with his abilities allowed him to do, maybe we wouldn't have this story. But
Mhm.
they, during that period of time of segregation, he was blocked at every turn, even getting involved in the military, thinking he's going to be able to use a GI Bill to pursue being a writer. He wrote articles to the militant Socialist Workers Party paper prior to that. When he was in college at West Virginia State, he wrote in the student newspaper poetry as well as
Mhm.
uh, essays and things of that nature. He was inspired by Paul Robeson and other folks like that during the 1950s, 40s, and 50s. So, um, but John wanted us to make sure we shared that legacy with as I would call the Black Lives Matter generation of activists. That they were aware of what the Williams did employed, particularly in terms of armed resistance, and that we had a right to defend ourselves against oppression by all means that were available to us. So that's where John was coming from. Interesting brother, because John Williams, went into exile. He and his brother went into exile with his parents. So they lived, they were old enough to participate as youth in the Monroe movement. The
Mhm.
Monroe, for the audience don't know, in the 1950s, Robert Williams organized his NAACP chapter formed a defense guard to defend themselves from the Ku Klux Klan, and they were able to fight back the Ku Klux Klan. But so his sons were involved in that movement, observed that movement, and then they go into exile in Cuba during the early days of the revolution. Then they go to China during the Cultural Revolution there in school,
Mhm.
so that they get a internationalist education. Now, one of the things about the Williams legacy, and particularly with Mabel, but both of them to some extent, is that both of them are Christians, and
Mhm.
so John became a Christian minister in his adult life. So he described himself as a Baptist Maoist. That was his ideology because he was so much influenced by what he saw in China, the efficiency of their revolution and things of that nature. So, like I said, he's an interesting character, interesting brother, a very
Absolutely.
good person and loved by many.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing the kind of rich context and story of how it came about. Yeah, that feels really juicy to just kind of unpack just the legacy. The now even getting into some of the questions that we want to ask at the end around what might be some of the lessons. And you definitely started to foreshadow a little bit for those who and kind of being able to connect Robert to Black freedom struggles. But if you could take a sec for those who are new to Robert and Mabel Williams. Can you talk a little bit about what was their role in our struggle for self-determination, self-defense, and self-respect, and in particular, the movement that we're connected to, the New African Independence Movement?
I say that's good, very good question. Robert Williams, it was one of the most important figures in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and early 60s. And why did I say, and the movement he's a part of, he helped build in Monroe, North Carolina. Uh, he was somebody who had been in, like I said, he'd been in the U.S. military. He was in the Marines and the U.S. Army, experienced discrimination, comes home to a community in the 1950s in Monroe, North Carolina. There's a Klan hotbed.
Mhm.
It's Ku Klux Klan coming into the black community, intimidating black people, things of that nature. And when you think about politicians later like Jesse Helms, his people are connected with that particular community. Uh, so he kind of gets the idea to recruit people into the NAACP, which he joins, and then he goes to the pool halls, he goes to the beauty shops, he goes to the barber shops, and he recruits grassroots working class people. So they began this self-defense movement. And when they stopped the Klan from invading in their community, it's reported in Jet Magazine and other black venues, black spaces to get information, the black press during that time. And he becomes like a folk hero in the community, in the black community across the country. But then other things kind of propel him into leadership. I'm talking about national and ultimately international leadership. One is there was a case where these black children and white children were playing, and a
Mhm.
white girl kisses two black boys. He gets back to her parents. They complain to the local authorities, and lo and behold, the two black boys, who are I think 12 or 13, they're convicted and they're given charges where they would stay incarcerated until they were 21. So Robert Williams begins an international campaign. He couldn't get support from the NAACP, so there's a black socialist uh, attorney, Conrad Lynn, who comes to their aid, and they do an international campaign. And so it makes the United States during the time of the Cold War look bad. And so
Mhm.
the two boys are released, back to their parents. So that was one of the things that, propels him nationally. Then the other piece was there are a couple of cases in Monroe where some black women were sexually assaulted by white men. And so their families wanted to get revenge physically. And
Mhm.
Robert Williams said, "No, we got witnesses. One of the witnesses was a white woman. We're gonna take them to court." They went to court. The people were convicted, but they weren't sentenced. And the court, given BS sentences. And so Robert Williams was really embarrassed, I would say. He was
Mhm.
embarrassed that, looking at the families and looking at these women, they went the route that he said to go. And so he has to make a statement. He said, we're going to meet violence with violence. And for an NAACP member to say that at that time, you know, uh, the national NAACP, which was, kind of conservative in the context of the movement. Roy Wilkins, if you ever heard of him, if not, look him up. Uh, they suspended him
Mhm.
as president of the Monroe, North Carolina NAACP, and then Conrad Lynn organized this hearing at the NAACP National Convention, where for Robert Williams to ask them to appeal the decision to suspend him, and he remained suspended. And the forces, of the NAACP national leadership at that time, they had really organized. I think they got Daisy Bates from, if you've heard of the Little Rock struggle, desegregation struggle, even though she had a self-defense group protecting her, she condemned them publicly. And But Rob, even though he was suspended from the NAACP, again, people in the community just loved it, and so one of the things that he and Mabel did, I believe in 1959, is they developed this newsletter called The Crusader. And again, with their neighbor, Ethel Azalea Johnson, they put together this newsletter. They put it out on mimeograph machine. It's very undeveloped early on. Um, but they built on it. Mabel eventually put some artwork to it. I didn't realize this when I was doing the book. I found out later that Mabel provided a lot of the art, but they began to distribute it, and the Crusader had a national following. It was, people in New York, people like Queen Mother Moore, Dr. John Henry Clark, uh, the novelist John Killings. They were all supporters of the Crusader. Malcolm X would invite, and a little Malcolm is mentioned. Mabel mentions the relationship between Malcolm and um, and Robert in her memoir. But Malcolm X would actually invite um, Robert Williams to the Nation of Islam Temple number 7 in the early 60s, and Robert would speak, and Malcolm would raise money because he and all the other people I mentioned would raise money. They weren't just distributing a newsletter. They would raise money, send it to Monroe to support the community there, help them buy guns and ammunition, things of that nature. People in Detroit, like the great General Baker, labor organizer, was a part of this Crusader network, and the students he was engaged with, James and Grace Lee Boggs, the radical intellectuals. So they had a national network of people. In another piece I wrote, I argued that this network that began around this whole issue of self-defense kind of leads to what we call the trend of revolutionary nationalism,
Mhm.
nationalism that's radical. Because we're talking about it early on. This is a movement for desegregation, but a lot of these folks were kind of they didn't go along with the rhetoric of nonviolence. Okay, and it moved from there to looking at, well, okay, well, how not only the method of challenging passive resistance, but also the question of power.
Mhm.
How can we ultimately have power as a people and have self-determination as a people? And that becomes a key issue. Also, and that's one of the issues that emerges when Robert Williams goes to Cuba, because there are elements of the United States Communist Party who are not supportive of Black self-defense. They're not as supportive of Black self-determination because it's interesting that they condemn not only Robert Williams, they condemn Malcolm X. And in Cuba, Robert runs into challenges because some of these elements have influence in the Cuban Communist Party. So whereas he has support from people like Fidel Castro, people like Che Guevara,
Mhm.
he doesn't have support from other elements of the Cuban Communist Party. So there's a conflict emerges, and they're very concerned at that point. By that point, Robert Williams is defining himself as a Black nationalist.
Mhm.
He does ultimately see, because I think particularly after Birmingham, this is my own analysis. It's not something he says. It's something I'm reading from statements he made that particularly after Birmingham, it's like if we don't do something, it's going to be genocide waged against our people. So I think this is why he kind of moves more and more toward that position and becomes Republic of New Africa position. And so first, Robert Williams in 64 helps bring together this, Robert, and I should say Robert and Mabel, helped bring together this network of young revolutionary nationalists in across the United States. And all of them had supported the Crusader Network and been a
Mhm.
part of the Crusader Network before. Um, because when they look at leaders out there, and particularly after the death of Malcolm. Um, but even prior to Malcolm, they're looking for direction. Robert Williams is one personality they identify with. And so they come to Cuba in 1964, and that's when they formed the Revolutionary Action Movement, which they called the Black Liberation Front.
Mhm.
Uh, Later on, some of these elements of RAM would form something they call the Black Liberation Party.
Mhm.
And I happened to see, I didn't actually, I ran into this the other day, Joe. Well, you know, I'm a nerd. I be reading, just looking for stuff. But I saw this document where they describe their Black Liberation Party. They said the chairman was Chairman Rob. At
Mhm.
that point, he's in China, you know. So he's very much connected with that development and with our organization, New African People's Organization. Of course, Robert Williams was named the first president of the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa when it was formed in 1968. And we actually have a photo in the book that's out there now. People have it where Gaidi Obadeli would and Mari's not in this particular photo. Who knows? He might have been the one who took it. Um, where he's meeting with people from African liberation movements, but also Robert Williams in Tanzania, because Robert Williams he discusses his travels to Africa in the book. Apparently, Robert Williams actually wanted to have. Let me take this back. He always, after he went into exile, he thought it was going to be a short piece. You know, he
Mhm.
didn't think he was going to be gone a long time. Sort of how we looked at the beginning of COVID. We thought we'd be home a couple of weeks.
Right, right.
But he didn't realize it was going to be a while,
Yeah.
some years. It was really a 61 to what 70. He comes back. So but he's always trying to get back.
Hmm.
There's blocks on him getting back. And I will say this, uh, one of the things he mentions in his memoir, and then we were able to find correspondence from the other party. But there was actually a guy who was a CIA agent, Richard Gibson, who was kind of discouraging him from coming back.
Hmm.
He said, "You can't trust these Ram people. You
Hmm.
can't trust these people producing Soul Book, because Soul Book, I think, as early as 1966, had exposed to a French publication that Richard Gibson was a CIA agent,
Hmm.
but now it's clear he was, but Robert Williams didn't know that at this time. So he said you can't trust these young people. They this, that, and the other. Richard Gibson was I think he was associated with a major corporate media outlet, but he was also an early member and leader of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, which is how he meets Rob
Hmm.
and develops a relationship with Rob. But he's discouraged him. And don't come back. It's not a good time. You know, you can't trust these people. So he's always trying to get back. But besides that, while he was abroad, even though he was treated well in Cuba, he was treated well in China, he wanted to go to the continent. So he was trying to seek a country on the continent of Africa where he could go and do his exile, being a proud uh, New African, right? He wanted to live on the African continent with his family, but he couldn't secure at that point a country that was willing to say, we're gonna have one of the most, important what do you call it, exiles live in our country. They weren't willing to, they weren't ready for that smoke.
Hmm.
But they did give him, Tanzania did allow him to be there like as a tourist.
Hmm.
So he was traveled East Africa while he was there. But that's why, I used to think he had asylum, permanent asylum there, but no, he just had temporary status as a visitor. Um, so yeah, that's his story, why he's important and how he's connected to us, because through the New African piece as well as Our organization, the New African People's Organization, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, we have lineage coming from not only Provisional Government of Republic of New Africa, but also from the Revolutionary Action Movement. So, like in our orientations, we talk about Queen Mother Moore, we talk about Malcolm X, but we also talk about Rob Williams. I think we should say Rob and Mabel,
Yeah.
because he didn't do anything significant without Mabel. She even one time he was being pursued by the cops, and she she came out with with her stuff, and they had to back up. So you'll see on the cover of our book, we got a couple of images to represent the title, but one of them is with them both holding handguns. And so maybe it wasn't no joke on the militia tip. Okay, so and then it was certainly important in terms of the Crusader, in terms of Radio Free Dixie as well. They were a team. So, but our organization holds them in high esteem for their contribution to our movement and our consciousness. And, so I'm honored. I was honored again to work on this project to make sure it's available to this next generation and trying to do my best, not only what's in the book, but other things about their legacy to make sure the next generation knows, future generations know, I should say.
Absolutely. All right. So we had a couple questions. I guess we could see if there's one that you want to really answer, but I had some questions around kind of the themes of the book: international solidarity, armed resistance, and African American freedom, and how it shapes their legacy. But I feel like you've been pulling at those threads. Also, I had a question around kind of what surprised you in the memoirs, what new information,
Mhm.
and I feel like you've been touching on that, the centrality of Mabel in the partnership. Like we should be referring to him as Robert and Mabel, and we do that. It's one who does the orientations. I always say Robert and Mabel. Make sure the idea there, the role of Mabel in the art, the situation in Africa, even the earlier story you shared about Robert declaring himself a black separatist. And then the other question I had was then around folks not being familiar with the relationship. Kind of another Malcolm turns 100. Robert also has all turned 100 this year. And from again, one of my learning points in coming into the organization was the relationship between Robert and Malcolm X. You've touched on a little bit around that. Malcolm inviting Robert to teach at the mosque, which is a big that's a big honor for somebody who's
Right.
not I'm saying that's a big
No,
thing.
you're not in the NOI.
Right, yeah. If you
Right.
right, if you ain't got, yeah, that's a really significant point to even them support, Malcolm supporting around raising money. So there's a conversation there that around that, and then again, as you've been hitting out, kind of the set of lessons. So I don't know if there's any one of those you want to take up
Well,
as we
the,
try
the
to move
thing
this
that's
close home.
maybe the thing that surprised me the most was the piece that I mentioned earlier around Juana Almeida's partner, and I tried hard to find her name. I could not find her name. I think must conceal the Cuban Revolution must concealed their family members,
Mm-hmm.
identities of their family members. But the fact that she was involved, and so that said to me that it wasn't just like Rob was able to make it across the border and get to Cuba, but it was like the Cuban Revolution. Fidel and the Central Committee made this a priority to get this black revolutionary safety to
Mm-hmm.
Cuba. I didn't know that before. And I knew he got there, and it really hadn't been discussed before. So that was one of the things that's revealed in the book. The other piece was I had heard this before, but the book kind of makes it clearer. he like I said, he was able to come back. Now there were elements inside the US government who wanted to lock him up. But then there were elements who was like, now this is the only man who been to China. He got a wealth of information about what was going on in China, and they want to go over there because that's
Mhm.
a big market. It's interesting in the context of where we're at today
Right,
with this
right.
tariff war going on. But they wanted, so there were elements inside of the U.S. capitalists, imperialists, rulers who were saying, "Now we need to get what's inside this man's head."
Mhm.
And so, because he knows the Chinese leadership, he knows everything. So, they, uh, when he initially comes back, he doesn't go to back to face trial in North Carolina. He has he was able to use the laws of Michigan because I believe in Michigan if there was somebody running away from segregation, there was legal means to protect them. But you know, these people do what they want to do.
Yeah.
So but there were elements within the state who wanted to hear what he had to say. And and so he was eventually taught in Chinese studies at University of Michigan, and so he was able to maintain his safety till he could arrange his defense to go back to North Carolina and to be exonerated of the charges there. For those that don't know, he was charged with kidnapping on a night where it was very hostile and um, between the black and white community. And it's more on that you can read in the book, all the details. A white couple like Willie and Wilhelmina Lump Lump are driving through the black community uh, and black people were ready to lynch him, and so they got the mob to take the white couple convinces the mob to allow them to go to Robert Williams' home, and they asked Robert Williams to escort them out of the black community, and he not sensing a setup, he says, "No, you can stay here overnight." And so then the next day, Robert Williams is threatened with by the state troopers are coming, and he would be lynched uh, on the county courthouse steps. So again, he thought, well, I should just leave the situation for a little while. But then it's escalated to be the FBI is looking for him, and there's a national manhunt for him, and then extended when he even goes into Canada, they're looking for him over there because he had the Crusader network expanded to go beyond the United States, and there were people in Canada who were part of the Crusader network, and also through the work Robert Williams was doing around Cuba, he had network with folks over there. I explained. I talked to someone the other day, and I said he defined himself as a separatist, but he wasn't an isolationist.
Mhm.
I don't even know if separatist is a good term. That's the terminology he's using for the time, that particular time. He's definitely a nationalist, but he's also an internationalist.
Mhm.
And he definitely sees himself as a revolutionary. He was critical of some Marxists. He made a distinction between Marxists. He said there were bourgeois communists and there were revolutionary communists.
Mhm.
And so he saw the bourgeois communists as those who didn't support revolutionary nationalism, didn't support armed resistance,
Mhm.
and uh, and revolution in that terminology. And on the other hand, of course, he met Che Guevara, Fidel Castro. So he didn't have the same opinion of them as he saw of some people who were discouraging black, and we're talking about the 60s and 70s,
Mhm.
right? So he's critical of people he sees who don't support revolutionary action movement, don't support Black Panther Party, don't support, what would emerge later as a BLA, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So those things he was more critical of those elements. He was more critical of.
Right. And then our last question, kind of one around really why should folks read the book, but really for grassroots organizers, revolutionaries, radicals, folks interested in change. Um, why should we go read the book? What are the lessons that we're going to gather from taking time to read these memoirs?
Now, I would say one of the reasons we should read the book is, his son was when I told you he met with us and he said he wanted the next generation to learn the lessons of his parents. Now, I don't know if he foresaw like some of these militias, even in the state that he was living in Michigan. Remember we had the militia that emerged after he died,
Mhm.
who were talking about they were gonna during the COVID, they were gonna lynch the governor of
Yeah, yeah,
of Michigan.
yeah.
He
So
did
plot
he
to
did
kidnap
not
him. Yeah,
he did not foresee, January 6th, 2021.
yeah.
Uh that we gotta know that we have to be prepared as a people. We got to be better organized to face. And so Robert and Mabel Williams tell that story. But again, as I said in the beginning, um, they were quite aware of, even though they were nationalists, do we need friends?
Mhm.
And the friends don't stop at the borders of the empire.
Mhm.
That we need friends around the world. And so they made friends across the world, and they were able to survive and be victorious
Mhm.
on a personal level, at least, because of the friendship they had made with people around the world, and the truth that they spoke during that particular time. So, I would say, we need to be inspired by their drive for armed self-defense, their international solidarity, as is mentioned in the piece, but also their use of journalism. And we definitely have more tools today than they had when they did the little mimeograph version of the Crusader. But it built from that into, a revolutionary nationalist movement, and it built into an international a movement that can survive throughout around and have impact around the globe.
Absolutely. All right. Well, there you go. All the reasons why we need to go pre-order our book if you haven't done so already. We'll put the link in the video, but you can get it from the University of North Carolina Press. And it's dropping June 2025. So one again, want to say Asante Sana to you, Baba, aka Professor, the People's Professor, Umoja, for joining us on BAM News and sharing with us this powerful book, The Memoirs of Robert and Mabel Williams, and looking for us to do some more study on the book once it's in our hands.
No doubt, we're developing a study guide as well.
All right, Ashe.
All right. Thanks a lot, Brother Jomo.
All right,
Blessings to you and the comrades in DC.
absolutely.
Ghana